Welcome to The Explainer. When we look at the War of 1812 in the western frontier, it kind of feels like it just suddenly erupted out of nowhere. But it absolutely didn't happen overnight. It was actually ignited by a 15-year paper war of treaties, aggressive land cessions, and mounting resistance.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to see exactly how a few signatures on paper created a domino effect that escalated into a full-blown continental war, moving from the initial hunger for land all the way to the legacy of lost sovereignty.
So part one, the hunger for land.
We've got to set the stage here. Following the American Revolution, the Northwest Territory was basically a total powder keg. You had thousands of eager white settlers pushing west, directly against native tribes who were fiercely determined to hold on to their ancestral homelands. Let's trace William Henry Harrison's relentless pursuit of this land. Starting with the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, we see a chronological push. By 1800, Harrison was appointed governor of the new Indiana Territory, and under strict orders from President Thomas Jefferson, he pursued highly aggressive land grabs.
Now, what's really wild is this staggering number. 51 million acres. In late 1805, Harrison managed to acquire this massive chunk of territory. We're talking a third of modern Illinois and parts of Wisconsin and Missouri. And how did you do it? Well, he basically warmed up just 5 minor chiefs from the Sac tribe with alcohol, exploited their poverty, and got them to sign the whole thing away for barely a penny per 200 acres. Literally, a fraction of a cent.
Which brings us to part 2, treaties and pushback.
As you might guess, these aggressive, frankly often fraudulent land grabs inevitably triggered massive pushback. The real breaking point, though, arrived with the 1809 Treaty of Fort Wayne. Harrison was trying to expedite statehood for Indiana, so he gathered leaders from the Delaware, Miami, and Potawatomi tribes. But he intentionally excluded any tribes he knew would be hostile to his deal.
And this perfectly illustrates the incredibly inequitable economics at play. Look at this. Harrison acquired 2.5 million acres of prime land southeast of the Wabash River. And in exchange, the tribes received goods valued at around $7,000 and a meager annual payment of $1,750. Now, sure, 2 cents an acre was technically a slightly higher rate than usual for these kinds of treaties, but the sheer massive scale of the land loss permanently enraged native populations. It set the stage for a dramatic counter-movement.
Moving right along to Section 3, the rise of the Confederacy.
All of this righteous anger scattered across the frontier was about to find a really powerful, unifying voice. Enter Tenskwatawa, also known as the Shawnee Prophet. He sparked this massive nativist religious movement that wholly rejected white American ways. That meant European clothing, and especially the alcohol that had been so destructive to their communities. But most importantly, he preached that absolutely no more land be ceded to the United States. This spiritual foundation rapidly evolved into a militant, pan-Indian resistance based at a stronghold called Prophetstown.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this intense ideological clash. On one side, you've got Harrison's strategy, right? Deliberately dividing tribal civil chiefs to negotiate piecemeal and buy land on the cheap. On the other side is Tenskwatawa's brother, the brilliant Shawnee leader Tecumseh. Tecumseh's core philosophy was that the land was communally owned by all native peoples, kind of like the air we breathe, meaning no single chief ever had the authority to sell it.
And that brings us to our 4th section, the spark at Tippecanoe.
These dueling ideologies simply couldn't coexist forever. You can actually feel the mounting tension in this incredibly boastful warning Harrison sent to Tecumseh just before their famous 1810 standoff. He wrote, "Our bluecoats are more numerous than you can count, and our hunting shirts are like the leaves of the forests." Wow. When they finally met in person at Harrison's Grouseland home, the impassioned Tecumseh called Harrison a liar right to his face regarding the legality of those land grabs. Weapons were literally drawn, swords and war clubs, and though bloodshed was narrowly avoided that day, open war was now just a matter of time.
Let's walk through exactly how this conflict escalated. After that Grouseland standoff, native raids ticked up. Harrison saw an opportunity in the fall of 1811 when Tecumseh actually left the territory to recruit Southern tribes into his confederacy. Capitalizing on his absence, Harrison marched a force of nearly 1,000 men right toward Prophetstown. On the dawn of November 7, 1811, Tenskwatawa's warriors launched a desperate surprise attack on Harrison's camp. This clash is what we now call the Battle of Tippecanoe.
Now, it's really fascinating to look at the historical sources here and realize this wasn't some flawless American victory like it's often portrayed. While Harrison's forces did eventually disperse the native warriors,
and burn Prophetstown to the ground, Tippecanoe was a brutal, costly fight. Harrison lost about 1/5 of his men, either killed or wounded, and rather than crushing the resistance, the battle actually hardened the Native American resolve for revenge, which led to a massive surge in frontier raids.
This takes us to Section 5, the War of 1812. That scattered frontier violence suddenly escalated into a theater of total war when the United States formally declared war on Great Britain in the summer of 1812. Believing a grand alliance with the British was literally the only way to stop American expansion, Tecumseh officially allied his forces with the British Empire. This was a game changer. It provided his warriors with the vital military supplies they so desperately needed, things like rifles, bullets, and gunpowder.
Let's trace the massive momentum swings of the war out west. It actually started disastrously for the Americans in August 1812 when British General Brock and Tecumseh forced the disgraceful surrender of Detroit. But then, the tide turned in September 1813 with Commander Perry's decisive naval victory on Lake Erie, which totally severed British supply lines. This forced the British and their native allies to abandon Detroit and retreat eastward, culminating in the absolutely critical Battle of the Thames in October 1813.
Let's break down the tactical steps of that battle. Harrison, who is now commanding the Northwestern Army, pursued the retreating British general Henry Proctor. When they finally clashed, Proctor deployed his forces really poorly. Harrison recognized this instantly and ordered his Kentucky mounted infantry to attack. The demoralized British lines broke almost immediately. The Native Americans, who were holding the right flank at a swampy area, fought on fiercely against the Americans, but were ultimately just overwhelmed by superior numbers.
Which brings us to our final section, the legacy of lost sovereignty.
We finally arrive at the aftermath, where the dominoes stop falling. And we really have to emphasize the tragic climax of this entire conflict. Tecumseh was killed in hand-to-hand combat during the Battle of the Thames. His death was a crushing, completely demoralizing blow. Without his visionary leadership and unifying presence, the organized Pan-Indian Confederacy instantly dissolved. It effectively ended their coordinated military threat in the region.
And this brilliantly illustrates the irony of history. Decades later, the bloody, highly costly Battle of Tippecanoe was sanitized and repackaged into a catchy political slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. This campaign ribbon is actually from William Henry Harrison's 1840 presidential run. His controversial territorial record was spun into this mythic narrative of a frontier hero, which successfully got him elected as the 9th President of the United States.
So, what does this all mean? Let's summarize why this matters. This 15-year chain of events, from the early fraudulent treaties all the way to the death of Tecumseh, permanently reshaped the map. It resulted in the total collapse of pan-Indian military resistance in the region, a massive and permanent loss of native lands, and the complete opening of the Northwest Territory to white settlement. The balance of power was forever shifted. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Could a unified pan-Indian confederacy have permanently halted westward expansion if the British hadn't retreated and their supply lines hadn't been cut prior to the Thames? It is truly fascinating to consider how vastly different the map of North America might look today if the dominoes of history had just fallen differently. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.